you everyone for coming. This is just a networking 101. Some of this stuff is probably going to be way too heady for some people, and some of it's going to be way too simple for some people. I'm trying to hit the middle here because what we are trying to do is address Pocket's scalability, which is, as you know, has been having problems in the past. 6.0 just came out here very recently, and it seems to be stabilizing things a lot. But there's kind of three sections. The first one is a just intro to gossip networks, networking in general. And we will go ahead and get started. There is a little disclaimer here that says, by the way, this somewhat simplified stuff, if you happen to be a networking expert and a bit of a pedantic person, too bad. Some of this stuff is oversimplified. May I have the next slide, please? Okay. I have two at once. That's fine. Let's start with the left-hand side with what is all this gossip? Gossip is a protocol, okay, which Pocket relies on for just about everything except its relay transferring to move information around through Tendermint about its block. Gossip is a very simple protocol. The rule number one of gossip is if you find a new piece of information, tell it to everyone you know. Basically, that's how gossip works. Rule two, of course, says if you want to find something out, ask everyone you know. Gossip is a really simple solution to a very difficult problem called the routing problem, which is it will find one way or another, gossip will find every node on the network. And it also has a very handy property of self-healing. When nodes die on a gossip network, the network basically adjusts around them. The bad part of that, it is extremely high in overhead of network traffic. Tons and tons of unnecessary network traffic. Let's look up over on the right where it says gossip is good. I mean, there's 4 nodes just talking to each other. Okay, life is great. You look one down and you'll notice that if you take any one of those nodes away, the rest of them are still talking to each other. That's part of what makes gossip solid. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay. Unfortunately, over here on the left, you'll notice something going on. In the first example, we have 3 nodes. They are using 3 connections. Life is good. We add 1 node, but we've added 3 connections when we added that 1 node into the second picture. Okay. We go down to 5 nodes, adding that 1 additional node added 5 new connections. Okay, and you can see on the right, you can just leave that column scaling this process up. By the time you get to 12 peers, you've got 67 connections, and each additional peer, or the next additional peer, is going to add 12 more connections. If we were set at 6 in, 6 out, we'd be sitting at 67 right now. This network has been set as high as 250 in and 250 out, so huge numbers. And they don't scale well. Luckily, this is an arithmetic scaling. It's not logarithmic, but it still won't work once you get to the number of nodes that we have. So may I have the next slide, please? Okay. Here's that same 6 in, 6 out from the previous number. We're looking at the left-hand side here. Got some nice things about this network. Everybody's talking to everybody. Everybody is fully connected. Okay, that's great. The problem is, who's feeding back? Is it me? sorry, that hurts my ears. Oh, thank you. Okay. Okay, I'm sorry about that. Uh, Over on the right, you're seeing 12 nodes. Basically, at a 6 in, 6 out, Gossip will stabilize at that pattern you're looking at. Fully connected, wonderful. You could kill nodes one at a time off of that pattern, and that network would stay fully connected. That's great. But it's massively over connected. A single message is going to echo 121 times. Look at over on the right hand side, you'll say, let's say node 1 found a new piece of information and wants to share that with the rest of the network. He's going to send that out to everyone he knows because that's the first rule of gossip. The problem is, look over at like node 7 or any of the other nodes. As far as node 7 concerned, that's a brand new piece of information. So what he's going to do is follow the rule of gossip and broadcast it to everyone he knows, even though the rest of the network already knows that information. If you pop to the next slide, please. Over on the left-hand side, you will that's the sum total of all of the unnecessary communication that is going to occur because of that one message. Okay. That's the bottom line. Gossip, it's really good at some points. It's really inefficient at others. People will say, hey, you know, Bitcoin uses the gossip protocol. And that's technically true about some aspects of Bitcoin, but it's absolutely false with regard to Bitcoin's block propagation and consensus. All the miners are hooked up through direct relay connections to each other. All the major pools and all the major miners are. They do not rely on Bitcoin's gossip network to move blocks around. Most nodes on the Bitcoin network simply listen. They don't even transmit at all. And they find peers via gossip. So we need to find something better we can do. Looking over at the right, we'll see there's a bunch of different ways that networks can be built, linked list, dandelion, et cetera, et cetera. The problem is we are a permissionless peer network. No one can force you to configure your node in any particular manner. If you configure it badly enough, maybe the network just won't talk to you. But we pretty much can't give you rules, only suggestions. So I'm trying to kind of help everyone understand where the depth is, where the excess is. May we have the next slide, please? Okay. Let's talk about towers and sentries and peers. Okay. Over on the left, we don't want it. We've seen it. It's massively redundant. I mean, that's only 12 nodes, and they're talking themselves to death. But we also don't want what's over on the right-hand side. That is a simple linked list in a circle, or a round robin, if you prefer. So let's move to the next slide. All right. This is, okay, let me read the note first off, which says that at this point, notice that straight lines represent direct connections between nodes, and the curvy lines are the gossip layer. You don't really need to worry about the towers at this point. I'm not sure that I should have put them in. If I was just building a little 12-node network, I wouldn't actually put 2 towers in it. I'd put node number 13 and node number 14 in there. What's happening here is we're building a simple structure beneath the gossip layer, and then adding a very, very tiny gossip layer to the top. Over on the right-hand side, you'll notice a gossip layer with the inbound and outbound peers, and outbound is the one that counts for volume. Outbound peers is set at 1. So that little network design over on the right-hand side, where you have your nodes basically directly connected to one another, and a 1 outbound peer, okay, creates the network that we're looking at. That's kind of quiet. Each node only has 3 connections. And more importantly, you can add nodes to that structure over and over and over and over again, and you will only add only add 3 connections for each node. It does not scale up either logarithmically or arithmetically. It is a straight line scale up. So you can grow a network really, really big that way. Okay, yes, go ahead to the next one, please. All right. Here we are going to attack that network that we just drew. First, on the left-hand side, we're going to kill that tower. Kill tower number 1. That network is still fine. On the right-hand side, we have killed both of those towers and knocked down 3 nodes. And you will notice that this network is still talking to itself. Okay? Everybody's connected. Even poor little node 5 out there is connected. The gossip network is saving his life. He's got 1 outbound and it looks like a pair of inbounds. Excuse me. So yeah, looking at that's a heavily attacked network. We just killed the 2 main communication points on it and 3 of its nodes, and it's still talking. So the question becomes, what are we doing that's making this strong? So if we can have the next slide, please. Okay. Over on the left, that original daisy chain circle that we built is what's keeping local groups talking to one another, even though there are network problems. And this tiny little gossip layer, looking over on the right, is what's making sure that none of those local groups get isolated, right? So gossip has this cute little self-healing factor. When a node dies, the nodes that were connected to it go try to find other places to connect. So, we're looking pretty good there. It kind of baits the question if the daisy chain and a little bit of gossip will make a network super strong. What do you need the towers for anyway? So if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay. The towers make sure that there's always a short point of connection. With the tower structure, notice we've removed both the gossip layer and the ring around the rosy. No node is ever more than 3 hops away. Most nodes are 2 hops away. So it's something to keep in mind. Towers aren't really critical at this point in the discussion, but what we managed to do, which is key, was show how you can build things that don't scale logarithmically or arithmetically, but still work and are very strong. All right, moving on to a little bit of Pocket and Tenderman in particular have inbound versus outbound peers. Peers are actually identical once they've been connected. Inbound and outbound define how they will be connected. Okay, it is absolutely critical that inbound be greater than outbound. The default 6.0 is setting the default at 7 out and 21 in. If you have reason to change that, go ahead and change it, but under no circumstances let inbound get smaller than outbound. If you're doing that, you are attacking the network. And the small little diagram just below there is showing you that's just a lousy little 4-node network. And because inbound is set to be less than outbound, node number 3 and node number 4 will never talk to each other. They can't. Neither one has any available inbound ports. Also, as an interesting result of that, node 2, node 3, and node 4 will constantly be trying to find someone to connect to. But there is no one to connect to because there aren't any inbound ports. Currently, the reason this is, it's critically important just in design. Always make sure inbound is greater than outbound. We had a big issue with that on the network recently, up until about a month or so ago. That has been taken care of. But just be aware of it. Make certain that your router accepts inbound connections on 26656. The network node, or the gossip multiplier, the little red box down here, it's outbound that defines how much redundancy exists. Inbound is basically an irrelevancy as long as it's greater than outbound. It's outbound, the outbound number is what's causing redundancy and multiplication in volume. Okay, moving forward. Ta-da! That is the world's quickest introduction to networking. You're done, you graduated, and you're happy. Yay. What the heck? Who cares? Okay. This is where we start figuring out what you can do depending on what size, how many nodes you operate, and etc. To help this network minimize the amount of traffic that is going on so that it's able to scale beyond its current level. Number one, of course, is make sure that your firewall is not blocking inbound. You can play in this game with nothing but outbound ports, but you are technically attacking the network the entire time you're playing, and that's frowned upon. All of the previous diagrams, all of those straight lines that were used to connect one node to the other, the following 4 commands inside your config.json is how those lines get drawn. Okay. First, max inbound and max outbound are in that file. That's pretty obvious. The default that ships, as I mentioned, is inbound at 21 and outbound at 7. But persistent peers and unconditional peers are also right there in the P2P section of config.json. And that's how the lines are drawn. The persistent peers line tells your client, try to connect to the following person. The unconditional peers line is very important. It says when you connect to that person or when that person connects to you, allow that connection to happen no matter what. In other words, even if my inbound ports are full and my outbound ports are full, I don't care. I still want to talk to that person if he wants to talk to me. Okay. So they have to operate in pairs. The format for them is slightly different, but it's not a big deal. So moving over to the right-hand side and up at the top, if there are any single node operators in the meeting here, good news is upgrade to 060 and you're already configured correctly. Okay. 7 out, 21 in, and you're golden. You do not need to make any changes to your config.json. Unless you want to get attached to the Cool Kids Peering Tower, which several people have. Just DM me and I'll give you instructions. The instructions are extremely similar to what we're about to look at. If you're running 2 nodes, okay, you can't build much of a daisy chain or much of any of those other designs that we kind of went through earlier, but you can at least connect node 1 and node 2 to each other so that no matter what, you've always got one good peer. Right? The 2 lines below are the exact, well, you'll have to change the address and domains, obviously, but are the format for each of the config.jsons on your node number 1 and node number 2 to get them to talk to each other. Let's see. Once you do that, basically the rule is for every direct connect, which is what we're calling this when you hook 2 nodes together by pointing to them with persistent and unconditional peers. Every time you make a direct connect, reduce your max outbound by 1 and your max inbound by 3. So the default is 7 out, 21 in, but after you connect your two nodes together, change that, or as you're in there changing it, change that to 6 and 18. Because one good connection is a hell of a lot better than a maybe shot around the network. Next slide, please. Okay, here's a 3 nodes. It's the same thing as doing 2 nodes, except we're building a tiny little 3-node daisy chain. Okay. Node 1 connects to node 2 and node 3. Node 2 connects to 1 and 3. Node 3 connects to 1 and 2. And similarly, down at the bottom, you'll change your outbounds to 5 and 15, 5 out, 15 in, because each one of those nodes has established 2 direct connects, so we'll reduce the outbound weight. Each node has 2 really, really good peers, and you know they're good peers because you run those nodes. The problem with peers is, in general, you can't trust them. You don't know that they're good. You don't know how they're configured. You don't know what software they're running. But the ones that you yourself manage, you know those are good peers. If you have like 4 through 12 nodes, right, you're getting to be, I don't know, a little pocket whale there. Stick with the daisy chain, right? Go ahead and chain all 12 of them in a nice little circle. You follow the same logic that we just described on the left-hand side there. That's enough. You don't really need a tower in there. The gossip layer is still there. I mean, at the moment, you're just looking at the daisy chain, but don't forget that the gossip layer is there, and it's a big gossip layer. It's not even the one in our previous example only had 1 outbound, and it worked wonderfully. These nodes will have 6, they'll have 5 outbounds plus that little daisy chain, just to make sure that if anything goes wrong, they're still all talking to one another. All right, let us move forward again, please. Okay, this on the left, you can just, basically it says, don't try to build this, you'll go crazy. It was a fun little design. It was meant to bring up the topic of the tower. You definitely would not want to try to actually do all the changes to a config.json to make that picture happen. And it would be hell to maintain it if you needed to change a node out. But it brings up the concept of towering and exactly what a tower is. Basically, a tower is a full node that has max inbound at 0 and max outbound at 0. It does not participate in the gossip network. It only direct connects to things. It only uses its persistent peers and unconditional peers to make connections. You can use a tower like that to consolidate traffic. You can use a validator as a tower. In other words, you could set 0, 0 and still have a validating node as long as your direct connects took you out to someone else who was participating in the network. You probably don't want to use a validator as a tower simply because of towers are meant to aggregate a whole bunch of links. And because of that, and Tendermint's really weird about peers sometimes, you end up restarting tower nodes more often than you would need to restart a validator. And basically, you don't want to restart your validators. Minimizing the number of connections they have is one of the key ways to keep from having to restart your validators. The fewer you want, a few good peers is way, way better than a whole bunch of unknown. And down in the bottom, we've got some questions for our big boys, the infrastructure providers. If you've got a ton of nodes, okay, you obviously can't manage them the way that's described over on the left-hand side. But are you willing to do enough work to figure this out? Because you can set up sentries instead of towers, and you can personally be responsible for reducing the traffic on this network by like 95%. So let's do one more slide here. Thank you so much. All right. Over on the left, you see a picture describing a sentry node. That node is directly connected to 40 validators. Those 40 validators are not participating in the gossip network. They are only talking to the sentry. They're directly connected to the sentry is directly connected to them, and the sentry is talking to the gossip network and perhaps some other direct connections to other, let's say, third-party providers. All the big guys, Skills and Block Spaces and Coder and etc., should at least have sentries or towers talking to each other to make sure the network stays in consensus. But this picture you're looking at on the left-hand side, okay, is actually reasonably easy to configure because all of those validators have identical config.jsons, at least with regard to their peering, because they all point to the same sentry. And you're looking at 40 nodes with the network footprint. In other words, the traffic being generated by those 40 nodes is equal to the traffic of one node. Okay. For safety's sake, if you're building a sentry system like this, you probably don't want to put all 40 against one poor node in case that node needs to reboot or etc. So you will probably go 40 nodes, all 40 of them connected to two sentries. Both they're connected to sentry A and to sentry B. Okay. That way, you're just safer if either of those sentries were to go down. Obviously, during maintenance time, you don't want to shut down both sentries at the same time. So taking that little block over on the left-hand side that shows 40 validators and 2 sentries, that effectively is the new definition of a node from a network point of view. So if we can go to what I think is the last slide, you then treat each of those sentry pairs as a single node and build a network basically like what was described in the first 3 or 4 slides of this presentation. Link each set in a daisy chain circle to itself, point them all to a tower so that they can get out. None of these are, you still have you have the same redundancy and strengths that we just showed way back in the beginning. If this thing were to get attacked, it still keeps talking to itself just fine. With this type of configuration, you're looking at 400 validators, and they are throwing the weight on the network of a lousy 20 nodes. Okay. We could get to 4,000 with a weight of 200 if everyone was scaling using this method or a method like it. And I'm not saying do it exactly this way, use 40 nodes, use 2 sentries. I'm saying, go through it, understand the process, figure out how you can reduce the weight. I'm just showing a logical example that creates a huge weight reduction and could get us past a dangerous point that the network is at. No one wants to go past 5,000 validators right now because we're fighting to keep 5,000 up, 4,000 up. I think that is like I said, I just wanted to repeat. Okay, I'm not prescribing do exactly this. I'm saying understand it and test it and build pods like this. I personally am using pods that are 25 per node, 25 nodes per pod. Any type of consolidation like this and reduction helps the network, particularly the big players. I've got a bunch of nodes, right? And I must have 300 inbound connections from skills. That's perfectly understandable. They got a whole bunch of nodes. But logically speaking, my network's all in one place, their network's all in one place. Why do I have to have 300 connections in between those two places? It's the same information. Okay, I think I'm done. Thank you for listening. We will take questions. Stream has ended.
Can you tell me about the size of those sentry nodes? How beefy do they have to be?
Nothing significant. The less than a validator. They don't have to pass relays. They'll never be a block producer. So whatever level you need to run a regular validator, you'll need that or a little bit less to run a sentry. It does have a little more calc overhead. It'll have like 40 or 45 peers. But processor wise, it's doing less work than a validator.
You mentioned something with Tendermint that's not really clear with the peers. Does that mean that that's why you run two sentries, because it may happen if some threshold peers will happen that it just crash, or what is the problem?
Tendermint's peer-to-peer section, as Andrew mentioned in the 6.0 call, it's the oldest part of the protocol, and it's buggy. It sometimes doesn't let go, particularly in its gossip section. It just doesn't let go of peers, even though the peer is gone, and so that slot just stays used up. So sometimes the only way to get Tendermint's peer-to-peer talking right again is to stop the client and restart it. That's not a big deal, but like I say, with 40, if you've got 40 validators attached to a node that are all relying on that node for their communication, you don't want to stop and start it even for a few seconds. Now, be aware that doesn't affect the node's ability, any of those validators' ability to send relays back and forth. It just has to do with the consensus level. So yeah, you could shut both of those sentries down, and those nodes would be just fine for the next 10 or 20 minutes. But as a general practice, I wouldn't rely on a single point for anything regarding Tendermint. So, because the validators in that final description, they are not participating in the gossip network at all. They are relied solely on those sentries for their communication. So I would have two.
And so do we have to set the inbound peers and the outbound peers to 0 in the case of this 40 validator with the sentries?
In the case of when you're sitting behind a sentry, yes, you are set inbound and outbound to 0.
Okay.
Amish Batman here. During the presentation, you had mentioned the numbers 21 and 7, 21 outbound, I believe, and 7 inbound. You said that was the default in the new config, or at least that's what I thought I heard. But in the new config, I see max inbound peers 50, max outbound peers 30. Where are those 7 and 21 values inside the new configs?
I know where they're supposed to be.
I just generated it from RCO60, and I don't see it.
I believe it's 721 in RC60. I'll confirm, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Did you use an existing data here, or did you generate a new data? Because it's not gonna try to overrun the existing information just in case.
my experience is that it did fix the existing information.
Maybe with the update util, yeah, it does. But by default, it shouldn't. But we'll look into it.
Yeah. The official spec at this time should be 7 out 21 in. In is always greater than out. And my experience with the 6.0 upgrade is that it changed those configs correctly by itself without running a util update. Oh, no. I did run util update on it. I have to look at my script. And don't panic when it runs and it shows exactly the opposite of what it does. It shows 21 out 7 in on its narrative, but that's not what it actually does. If you look at the config.json, it changes them correctly to 7 out 21 in.
From what I see, it did change it. It was 250 and 250 on the previous ones, but I just now ran 060. It made its default config, and max inbound is 50 and outbound is 30.
It should not be that way. Please change it to out 7 and in 21.
Okay. We'll need to know any other changes need to be made to these configs if they're not right. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know beyond that. I mean, Andrew and Luis can speak to further to 6.0, but that is the standard that we would like all individual nodes set at, and people who are running multiple nodes should basically be adopting one of the strategies that we went through to find a way to set that to even lower values.
Got a quick question. So I was a little confused because we were talking about how towers is not the way to go, but then sentries were the way to go. But then your graph were reintroducing towers. And the reason we didn't want to do towers was because, well, I guess the idea was using validators for towers. Anyways, so to be clear, like towers are good, just with a more century kind of model behind it.
It totally depends on volume. Tower is and how you build your config. A tower is just kind of a handy way to make sure that a known safe good path exists and that you don't end up walking all the way around a daisy chain from one side to the other. You definitely don't you probably don't want to use a validator as a tower, but if you're in a small environment, you've got 8 nodes, 10 nodes total, sure, go ahead and just point all your nodes at one tower, as long as you're not removing the gossip layer. Just reduce the gossip layer, don't remove it. Sentries are effectively, yeah, I said forget towers. All right. What I meant by that is that that the real savings are in combining validators behind sentries. yeah, towers are still handy. I mean, I have a little tower that sits out there. Everyone's invited. Send me a DM with your information. I'll put your information in my config. You put my information in your config, and then we can meet. That's like a publicly managed tower. It's good to have them to ensure that no matter what the circumstance is, you don't want to end up in an isolated group of validators where you've got a whole bunch of validators who are talking to each other, but they've somehow lost contact with the bigger picture of the network. So, you can tower connect big people that way, and you can also use individuals and just drop them to a tower. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. Yeah, the different designs are aimed at different levels of how many nodes you run.
Yep. Yeah, that answered my question. To follow real quick, is there any I guess like open source tower setups that anyone has done? If there are, that might be a great way to encourage people to set up towers, or I guess validators, or I guess the sentries are just more of a custom config. But
yeah, a tower is just a regular pocket full node, not a validator, and it just has inbound set to 0 and outbound set to 0. Boom.
Okay.
That's it. You're a tower.
Okay, got it. Okay, that's what you meant by not be a validator. You're still a pocket node, just not a validator. Got it. Sorry, I was missing that. That was my bad. And then final question: the default going from 250 to this 7 and 21, will that in itself, kind of once the network updates to 6.0, will that in itself open us up to be able to scale just kind of by default, and then hopefully larger service providers can reduce that number even more? But I assume that initial update will really increase our scalability kind of right off the bat.
It will reduce network load. It will reduce traffic load and traffic redundancy, which I believe is the large part of most of our delay issues. There's always a trade-off for A and B. 250, great. You can talk to everybody. The problem is the network dies in its own chatter. No, right? By the time you're sending the same message 250 times. By the time you get to the 249th guy, you're receiving the same message back from previous people. So, to answer your question directly, my belief is that it should, from the way I see the network as being configured now. I do not have visibility into anyone's setup except mine, right? I can only into how other people are set up based on how the network's behaving. There are people out there, I'm reasonably sure, that are still running 250. Hopefully when 6.0 actually activates and we kick them off the network, that will improve performance.
All right, I have a question. So say we reload, or we already generated and are using the standard 060 configs. Now we need to change persistent peers, or not persistent peers, the max number of inbound and outbound. What is the command, preferably RPC or command line, whatever? What is the command to reload configs?
I am not aware of a reload config other than stopping and restarting the client.
You have to completely stop your node and then restart it in order to. Okay.
You don't have to reboot the server, but you have to stop the client and restart it, is my understanding. I'm not aware of any other way to do it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
I don't have good data on 6.0, but in general, you restart the things once every couple of weeks anyway.
Why would you restart a node every couple weeks?
To get it to let go of its peers, of its bad peers.
So is this is it the peering and kind of how Tendermint deals with peering? One of the issues that we start running into when we hit 5,000 nodes is that where the bottleneck has kind of been on the consensus level with peering. Well, I know on the validator side, like the block producing side, that was an issue. But when we go to a set number of validators and we just scale the nodes, is that the big issue with scaling? Is this the issue with scaling our peers or scaling our nodes through the peers, or is there some other bottleneck that is also part of the 5,000? I'm trying to figure out, is this the solution?
I can't swear that it is the solution. There are multiple causes going on here. This is one more optimization. This one is on the traffic and peering side. I mean, 6.0 itself is a big fix. And then 6.0 is already more stable than it was. And the 6.0 rule change, when it actually activates, is another significant fix, which is, hopefully, Andrew should be speaking here, not me, but which, hopefully will get rid of what we're calling the poison peer problem, which is some of these old revs appear to be attacking the new revs. And then simply reducing the traffic. As we have mentioned, the network has been, or when I say we, as other people have mentioned, the network's been tested, simulated up to 5,000 with big numbers. But real world hasn't been able to support those numbers. However, grouping together in century fashion and reducing, increasing your strength by getting some hard connections allows you to reduce the number of soft connections, which effectively lowers the amount. It's as if the network had less validators. Once again, I'm not 100% sure that I've answered your question. I'm sorry.
How does this design affect things with the kind of separation of servicing and validating past the 5K limit that we have now? Does this design change? Are there other considerations?
So the thing here is, the thing that we have to take into consideration is that transaction traffic, it's linear, right? Like the more servicers there are in the network, the more transactions are going to need to be gossiped because of the fact that these servicers all will have to get paid. And the way to get paid is to submit a transaction into the network. So what's going to end up happening is that even if we have servicer even if we have a 5,000 limit on validators, that means that then the both messages for blocks is going to be capped at 5,000, but the transactions are going to grow linearly. Of course, there's a point in time where blocks are finite. They can only they have a 4 megabytes in max size, including the both headers that need to go on in there. So at that point, then validators, which now after 5.2, I believe, are are spreading out the transactions, meaning they don't send it right after the session ends. They send it spread out. So, but even without that, scalability it grows linearly, right? So this solution, this kind of network topology, what it's going to allow is to allow us with with the utmost efficiency to submit as many messages as we can throughout the network. So the consensus messages that need to get in time for blocks to be produced and stuff can keep happening in a timely fashion, even with a high transactional volume.
So the constraint becomes block size as opposed to kind of this networking issue that we're having.
It's both. It's a cap theorem issue. It's both things. Like the block size is one thing, but also you don't want to increase the block size because if the block is too big, it takes more time to download and to download all the information, and so it becomes a cap theorem issue where changing one variable doesn't mean that you can't not affect the other two.
Addressing the back to the question, I think I do not know the answer. I've been working on this one for a couple of days, and I need to talk to Luis and Andrew. But I think that a service node only needs to listen and does not need to echo block information or signature information. It will need to hear the block because it needs to stay current on block count and etc. But I think service nodes might be able to be listen-only nodes as long as they can get their transaction itself broadcast. And if that's the case, service nodes will have almost no effect on network volume. Listening is free.
Yes, besides transactions, like you mentioned, that is correct. Service nodes are essentially only needed to be read-only. Of course, service nodes, pure service nodes will only be in effect past the 5,000 DAO limit that's currently set, the max validators per M. So this is something that hopefully, in conjunction with the separation of service and validation, will allow us to scale to quite new heights. Because ultimately, Shawn's right or Van's right. Our 5,000 validator test was run with 250 in, 250 out on release candidate 5.0, which, as everyone knows, was far less efficient in basically every aspect, including peer-to-peer, just given the config. So we hope to see with these sort of changes, the community effort and the software optimizing, scalability becoming less of a concern in the short term, so that we can wait for that Tendermint peer-to-peer refactor.
Oh, cool. Are there any questions? We're at the top of the hour. I don't know if anyone had any other questions, or if Van, if you wanted to finish with some last thoughts.
I'm sorry, I got a lot of feedback. What was that again?
I was just saying we're at the top of the hour. I don't know if you wanted to wrap up with any last thoughts, or if anyone had any other questions.
No, he asked a question. What he asked was, how do you assess the network load, like your impact on the network when you make these config changes? Like, how do you benchmark it? Do you have any suggestions, etc.?
That's really, really tough, except just to do the math. Can you actually see your effect of your changes? And the answer is basically no. It's really hard. I mean, you can tell if you've messed something up because your nodes stop working, right? But if you've, let's say you run, 50 nodes or 100 nodes, okay? You could make a super change that really helps the network and frees up 1,000 inbound slots and reduces your traffic by 20% or 50% or 80%. And the network would not be able to detect that. There are not tools in place to be able to monitor at that level. So some of what's being attacked here is basically just me intuitively attacking what I feel is an obvious problem. I have a background in networking, not just making stuff up.
Yeah, and in addition to that, so he's completely right when he talks about the global metrics about like how do we monitor a network of this size. The tools aren't in place. But however, if you talk about your own personal node, there's a few things you can look at. Every time you have a connection, you spin up more Go routines if you're running Pocket Core Client. And those Go routines are actually monitorable via the number of files that are open. So the number one way you can see the actual impact when you do certain things like this is your resource consumption. And that can be everything from bytes in and bytes out on the network side, which you should see a drastic change from, to memory consumption, to open files, etc. Because what we've seen, especially during the 5.2.9 era, switching from 5.0, which was 250 in, 250 out, we saw a drastic reduction in resource consumption just across the board when we limited things on peer-to-peer, in addition to software optimizations that were made. But just to answer your question directly, if you want to see the impact you have when you limit the number of connections and are still able to achieve that same utility, it's all going to be about resources, how, depending on your cloud provider, how much it's costing you. And if you have a Grafana monitoring dashboard, you can actually real-time monitor how your node is consuming.
All right. If I had one wish at the end of the call, it would be that the big provider have see that they, there is a way that they can. We're talking 5 to 1, 10 to 1, even 20 to 1, reduce the weight on the network. Even though all the small guys and small providers can all help, the big guys are where the weight is. And that's all I've got.
Amazing. Thanks for doing this. This was a great presentation. I know I learned a lot. I think Alberto will be posting this on YouTube. So for people to review. And I hope you could post the presentation as well for resources as well.
Yeah, if you want to, you have that copy I just gave you. If you want to throw that in an appropriate place, feel free to do so.
Happy to.
Cool. All right, guys. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey, and as a quick note, there is a community call next week for a node management software that'll be free for people to use. We're going to be doing a kind of beta and public demo of it next Monday. So feel free to join that community call. It's in the calendar. So we'd love to show you guys what's been happening since last August. We've been working on it, so excited to show you guys.